Hello, parents of LGBTQIA plus people, and of course anyone else who has an LGBTQIA plus person in their life that they care about, that they love, and that they want to really just do better for. So I want to welcome you to our series around how to recover from mistakes. This is one of the biggest stressors that I hear from parents and other people who are wanting to support their LGBTQIA plus loved one in the best possible way, but they're afraid of making mistakes. They're uncertain about what the proper language is or how to refer to different circumstances in life, etc., etc. We'll get into that more as the series goes on. This is all about you approaching yourself with kindness and compassion, learning how to accept the fact that you're human and you're going to make mistakes, and at the same time, take responsibility for those mistakes. I guess make yourself accountable for them rather than expecting or hoping for the LGBTQA plus person in your life to make you feel better or to excuse your behavior. Now, I don't know if that seems or feels a little bit uncomfortable, but the thing is, when we make mistakes and we make a big fuss about them, we're then kind of projecting the responsibility onto the other person to make us feel better and to, let us off the hook for the mistakes that we've made. So we want to basically stop doing that. And we also want to approach mistakes in a way that we can learn from them. Because when we learn from them, we reduce the amount of mistakes we make, which reduces the discomfort for us and, of course, for our loved ones. Okay, so let's start with one of the most commonly talked about mistakes that people make, and that is around pronouns and names. So if you have a trans or gender diverse person in your life and they've changed their name and or their pronouns, it can be difficult to remember to use the correct name and or to remember to use the correct pronouns. And what can often happen is the guilt and the embarrassment and the frustration for yourself when you make the mistakes can then override any ability to be able to make the changes. The other thing that often happens is your loved one, then your trans loved one, then becomes quite impatient and intolerant of your mistakes. Now, both of those things, in my opinion, are quite reasonable. What I want you to remember is if you're making mistakes, even if you make one mistake in a day, that one mistake may be the 100th mistake that your child or your loved one has heard or experienced. So when we go, oh, I've been doing so well, I just made this one mistake, it's like, that's fair enough. That's reasonable that you're shocked that the person might be frustrated with you or cranky with you. But that frustration and crankiness might be coming from a whole day of mistakes that they've had to experience. The other thing is, the hope is for your loved ones is that when they're with their parents or their loved ones, when they're in the safety of their own home or their own family unit or depending on who you are to that person in that environment, their hope is that they can be safe and they can be seen and heard and understood and interacted with in a way that feels the most comfortable for them. So let's work on these mistakes, work on reducing them. And like I said before, the best way to do that is approach yourself with kindness and compassion and a commitment to reducing those mistakes and a commitment to taking responsibility for them. So one of the things that I talk about in my book, It's About You Too, when it comes to pronouns and names, is practice. Practice, 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 and then repeat. So if your child or your loved one is out as trans and other people in your life know their name, their new name and their new pronouns, then that can make it a lot easier to practice. What I encourage you to do is use that name regardless of whether your child is within earshot, whether they're around. Use it anyway. Use their pronouns, of course, only in a place that is safe for them and that they're actually out with people they're out with. But practice it. And if you make a mistake, practice correcting that mistake, and we'll talk about that in a minute. and correct yourself. So when I say practice, I'm encouraging you to use the name and pronouns potentially more than what you would in an ordinary conversation, so that you can become more familiar and more comfortable hearing that name, hearing the pronouns when you're referring to that particular person. So practice, practice, practice. The other element of practice is, when your child isn't out and you don't have many or any other people to practice with, then you practice alone with yourself. And you can also do this even if there are other people that they're out to, just so you can get really familiar as quickly as possible. And there's lots of different strategies that I talk to parents about, but a couple that stand out to me is literally standing in the mirror and saying their name over and over and over again. You might just literally say their name. You might, say a story, like come up with a story, talk about them so that you're incorporating their name and their pronouns in those sentences. You might just have one sentence that you repeat over and over again, or a couple of sentences. Depends how creative you are. And I know it can feel really silly because you're talking to yourself in the mirror, but please know that that little bit of silliness that you feel is going to make the world of difference in your child or your loved one's life. The other thing that I encourage you to do is to put their name up, in different places. If your child is living at home and you're living in the same house as them, pop their name on their door. Of course, check with them first that it's okay. And of course, it can only be when they're out to other people, but pop their name on their bedroom door. And so when you walk past, you're seeing their name. So before you knock on their door, you're getting a reminder. Make sure that you've put their new name in your phone or anywhere else that you're likely to see their names. You want to remove as much as possible their old name so that you can make sure that you're not getting, those confusing messages. Whilst we're talking about mistakes and around pronouns and names, one of the really important things to remember is when you do make a mistake, is to quickly acknowledge the mistake and apologize and move on. Like I mentioned at the start, when we make a big fuss about the mistake, then what we're basically doing is projecting the necessity for the other person, the trans person, to make us feel better. And I know that's not your intent. You're probably overwhelmed with a bit of guilt and embarrassment or uncomfortableness, and you're really wanting to make sure that they know that you didn't mean it and that you're sorry and all of that. But the problem is that, the consequence of that is that then they feel uncomfortable as well. And then they feel responsible to make you feel better. So a quick, clear acknowledgement, apology, and moving on. So it can be something like, say you've said the incorrect name, you just quickly change it. So if someone was speaking to me, it could be, oh, sorry, Tracy, and then keep going with the sentence. Or, oops, sorry, she, and keep going with the sentence. That's all it needs to be. You may or may not need to address it later on with your child if there's been lots of mistakes or if you notice that they're really upset. But try not to do it in that moment in front of other people or, in the middle of a conversation, and give yourself a bit of time to, kind of regroup and when you approach that apology, if there needs to be a more in-depth apology or discussion, you're doing it from a place of wanting to ensure that they understand that you love them and support them, rather than trying to alleviate your discomfort and your feeling of guilt. I hope that helps. We're going to be talking about a whole bunch of other things really soon. The next topic is going to be about not bullying yourself. So don't bully yourself. Be kind, and I'll see you next time.